Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm so sorry about the late start to this webinar this evening. Please forgive us. This is the very first one that we have done, and the technology, as you might imagine, always has gremlins in it at the last minute. Thank you very much for your patience. My name's Jane Johnston. I'm the Head of Community and Corporate Affairs at NATS. I'm chairing the session this evening. With me this evening, I have Nicole Morris, who is the Airspace and Noise Performance Manager at London Luton Airport. She has a lot of experience in this area and has been at Luton Airport for a long time, so we're looking forward to hearing from her this evening. And we also have Lee Bolton, who's the Head of Airspace Development at NATS, who will take us very shortly through a presentation of the proposed changes to the arrival flight paths for London Luton Airport. The consultation that we have opened runs for 15 and a half weeks. It started last Monday, the 19th of October, and it runs until the 5th of February next year. So we hope that that is plenty of time for you to give us your feedback, and your feedback really does matter to us. We can't impress that hard enough. This evening, please post your questions. I'm delighted to see that some of you have already been asking questions. We'll get to a Q&A session after the presentation. And what we're going to do first is introduce you to the proposals that London Luton Airport and NATS are making jointly for arrival flight paths into the airport, how the proposed changes might affect you. We'll take you through a bit of a presentation on what happens today with our flight paths into Luton and why we need to change them. And then there are two options that we will take you through. Two options for both easterly and westerly operations. One which is based very much on the way that aircraft fly today, and the second, which is introducing a new way of navigating, which is actually becoming a global mandate very shortly. And it's the standard to which all of our airspace modernisation is going to be taking place in the future. Then we'll come back a little bit to the next steps and how the consultation itself works. And then we'll open for the Q&A. And as I say, throughout the presentation, please do keep on posting your questions, and we'll come to them at the end. I'm going to hand over now to Lee Bolton to take you through the presentation. Thanks, Lee.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can see the slides in front of you. The proposal is related to a change to London Luton arrival flight paths. The sponsors of the change are London Luton Airport and NATS. NATS provides air traffic control over the UK and at certain airports. London Luton Airport is one of those airports. The background to this is that anyone who proposes a change to airspace needs to follow the Civil Aviation Authority's process. That's called the CAP 1616 process, and that can be seen by going to the Civil Aviation Authority's website. That's a 7-stage process, and we're currently in stage 3 of that process, which is consultation, a very important element of any change so that we can ensure that people can understand the proposal and also feedback their comments. Primarily, the consultation is focused on changes below 7,000 feet. As a consequence of that is the focus on which noise is a key priority. However, this consultation also is welcoming views on the changes above 7,000 feet, which will involve the positioning of the hold, etc. So we welcome comments on all elements of the proposal. And therefore we want to hear from you so that we understand your views on these proposals, so that you understand the likely impact and consequence of the proposal on the local areas, and primarily that will be taken into account. Those views will be taken into account once the consultation is over and prior to our submission of the final proposal to the Civil Aviation Authority next June. So we really do encourage yourselves and people in the communities to feedback their view. Now, this is a map in front of you, hopefully you can see that, of the local area. Now, it's local in air traffic control terms. It's probably not local to you sitting in your homes watching this presentation, because as you can see on the left-hand side, it goes all the way sort of from Aylesbury all the way over to the east towards Ipswich. So that's quite a big area, but in air traffic control terms, it's not a big area because of the speed of the aircraft and the volume of flights that take place over this whole region. So on this chart, hopefully you will see London Luton Airport and the runways there designated in blue, and London Stansted Airport in orange. Now the two holds or stacks that are shown in orange there are what's currently the holding arrangements. They are shared holds for both London Luton and London Stansted arrivals. So hopefully you will get an impression there of the location geography that we're looking at here. The areas that are affected are now appearing by coloured areas, coloured dashed lines, and this is the area where new controlled airspace is being proposed to be established in order to accommodate out a new flight path for London Luton arrivals into a dedicated hold, and we can come on to that in a little bit in a little while. But there you can see, hopefully from this, that for flights that currently are inbound to London Luton, which would fly to Abbott or fly into the Laurel holds, traffic from the east would be moved further north to separate out and have a dedicated flow for London Luton arrivals and to separate them out from the London Stansted arrivals, which currently share those same holds. Aeroplanes will be descending, and you can see the key here on the right, 13,000 feet or higher in this area, descending 11,000 feet or higher in this darker green area, and in the black area here, 8,000 feet and higher, as they route towards the new holding arrangements being proposed here. This fillet of controlled airspace, as we called it on the left here, the light grey, is to enable aircraft to enter the new holding arrangement inbound to London Luton arrivals and descend down into the lowest level of the hold, which would be 8,000 feet or above. So that's hopefully indicating the higher areas of change above 8,000 feet. And then below 8,000 feet, aeroplanes today and in the future will operate within this lilac area, purple area here. And this is where the area of focus is for flights below 8,000 feet. I should stress at this time that the current hold here at Laurel above Royston and at Abbott, it's called Abbott, and is above Sudbury, they would remain, and those holds will be retained purely for Stansted arrival traffic. So hopefully that gives you an indication of the geographical area that we're looking at. Now, a key question may be why is the hold positioned or proposed to be positioned where it is? And that's because this is a very complex, constrained piece of airspace supporting the London southeast region of England. And as I've already explained, 8,000 feet and below, there's an awful lot of aircraft operating in this area today. But perhaps what is not quite so visible or understood is the very fact that the north-south flow through the UK, this is to destinations north of Birmingham and traffic from the north of Birmingham heading south towards continental Europe. There is, if you like, a motorway or a number of motorways in the sky to the west of Huntington, to the west of the A1, which continually are flown and that therefore is a concentrated and complex piece of airspace which could not accommodate a hold safely. Likewise, to the south of the region, and there are crossing routes for traffic overflying the UK to the North Atlantic, or from the North Atlantic to Europe. There are flights inbound to other airfields in the London southeast region, such as London Heathrow and Farnborough, and also traffic to the west, such as Bristol and Cardiff. So again, this is a busy highway in the sky, and therefore placing a hold in this area is also complex and would not work. To the north of the area in question, we have military operations. As you're probably aware, RAF Mildenhall, RAF Lakenheath are situated just there north of the A14, just to the north west of Bury St Edmunds. I'm sure you're familiar with those operations, and military operations take place to the north of the area. So as you can see, there is quite a narrow, defined area of opportunity to place a new hold to accommodate London Luton arrivals. So that hopefully gives you an understanding of some of the constraints that we have in designing airspace and some of the ensure the safety of the operation in the future. So this is also a more detailed view of what happens today for London Stansted arrivals and London Luton airport arrivals. So we have the existing holds in orange, and the orange flows show the Stansted routes into those holds. So the hold out to the east, Abbott, is primarily for aircraft from the East Continental Europe heading into Stansted, and the Laurel hold is utilised by London Stansted arrivals from the south coast, from France and Spain and Italy, and also from the west and the north come into Laurel there from the Milton Keynes area into the Laurel hold. That is the same for the Luton arrivals, and this proposal is about separating out the London Luton arrivals from the London Stansted arrivals, and this is indicating the higher altitude arrangements in place to support that. So we're in effect generating a bypass route, just like you would round a busy congested town. Aeroplanes and cars indeed may travel a little bit further, but overall the efficiency is improved because we're bypassing this complex arrangement, and with London Luton arrivals from the south, bypassing between the two holds. For traffic from the east, London Luton arrivals would follow the northerly blue arrow there, or top blue arrow, into the hold if required, and traffic from the south, west and north would come in over sort of the Milton Keynes area and inbound to the hold. Now, that's if aircraft are required to hold. And we need to hold for safety purposes in case there's a runway blocked and we have a lot of arrival traffic. We need to have a safe arrangement in place to be able to safely manage all those arrivals from Europe, which would be in the air and may have to hold. Now, and also when it gets very busy, because the demand may be too high for the runway to accommodate, given the departures need to get away as well. So that's why we need a hold for safety purposes and resilience. Now, it doesn't mean that an aircraft will always enter the hold. In fact, we do our utmost as air traffic controllers to negate the need for holding, but it's there in case we need to. And if aircraft do enter the hold, they will do it following sort of the lines, the dashed lines there, entering the hold and following the holding pattern. And as you can see there, it's a clockwise direction over the junction of the A1 to the A14 to try and minimise the impact over the Huntingdon area, or Huntingdon town. And then they would leave the hold if required down towards London Luton Airport. A little bit more about that in a while. But as I say, we don't expect aircraft to hold routinely. In fact, we believe more aeroplanes will be given routes towards London Luton Airport rather than going into the hold, because that's naturally what we try to do. We understand it is far better for the aeroplanes to be arriving at the destination expeditiously rather than going around a hold waiting to land. So we do our very utmost to reduce the amount of holding. And therefore these shortcuts and alternative routes, when able, will be given to enable the aeroplanes to fly without having to take up the hold towards London Luton Airport. But those are the changes that would occur above 8,000 feet. And hopefully from that picture you will understand how we are separating out the London Luton arrivals from the London Stansted arrivals. So as I've already said, it's an incredibly complex piece of airspace, and it was designed, some of it was designed a number of decades ago, and it's now outdated. It's not as efficient as it can be, and therefore it needs to be updated and designed for the traffic numbers we expect to see in the future and the aircraft performance that we see now and into the future. As I've said, London Luton and Stansted Airport share those arrival routes in the holds, which is actually unique for two major airports in the UK. London Luton Airport is the 5th busiest, and London Stansted Airport the 3rd busiest. That is pre-pandemic times. But because they share those arrival routes and holds, they are interdependent. If one airport is runway is blocked, aircraft are holding, then the other airports' flights would be affected by that unnecessarily, and that would therefore generate delay, extra fuel burn and emissions, because there is no way down for the London Luton Airport traffic, or not without a high degree of complexity. So this proposal seeks to separate out those aircraft and make it non-dependent, each airport non-dependent on the other. When it does get complex, we, as is air traffic control, have to limit the number of aircraft in the vicinity in order to maintain safety, because it can become complex. Now that then means that aeroplanes are delayed and passengers are delayed. And that's the way that we manage this on a short-term temporary solution. As I've said, some of these procedures have been in place for a number of decades and they need updating. And we want to reduce and hopefully remove the delay that's generated by the complexity that we see in the airspace. And the following slides are going to go into this in more detail so you get a good understanding of what is being proposed and what happens today. What should be understood is, unfortunately, air traffic control has no control over the wind and the weather. And because aircraft land into wind and depart into wind, and because of the geographical location of the UK on the eastern side of the North Atlantic, the jet stream generates our traffic, our weather and the wind direction. And therefore we see westerly winds, that is winds from the west, about 70% of the time in the UK, with 30% of the time coming from the east, from continental Europe. So that means for 70% of the time, we operate generally on westerly operations, that is aeroplanes landing towards the west and departing towards the west. And that's important because that affects where aeroplanes fly. So as I've said already, why does it need to change? We need to change to separate out those arrival flows and make the operation more efficient and predictable by removing the complexity and the interdependency between the two airports. It will also mean there's less intervention from air traffic controllers, less workload, and that in itself can enhance safety. Removing the shared hold will reduce those knock-on delays, and meaning that people of Luton and surrounding areas are not impacted by issues at Stansted. It will reduce congestion, which will benefit the travelling passenger and associated businesses and the local economy. unless we make changes, and as the pandemic hopefully comes to an end and people want to go on holiday, want to renew their business ties, we believe air travel will return. And therefore these changes will reduce the delays people experience and also reduce the unnecessary airborne holding that takes place today. And as the proposal involves separating out those London Luton arrivals further out and higher up to reduce the delays and ensure safety, as I've said, we're not proposing any changes to the Stansted route, but we are seeking your feedback on two options of how to route aeroplanes from the new proposed hold towards London Luton Airport. And a key part of the consultation is to elicit your views over the more equitable distribution of air traffic for communities that are affected by the flight paths into London Luton Airport as a consequence of this proposal. Now, this is quite a busy slide, and what it is intended to do is to try and enable you to orientate yourself on the or around the arrival flows. This is an example of the Laurel hold, the existing hold, and what happens today inbound to London Luton, and I will go through that in a little bit more detail, explain what the coloured blocks are, etc. But ultimately, it's there to enable you to hopefully pinpoint where you're situated, so you can understand in the following slides where the aeroplanes may be in relation to where you are. Okay, so the next few slides are going to explain what happens today in easterly operations. So we have London Luton Airport here as indicated, and we have the Laurel hold here and the Abbott hold out to the east. Now, traffic from the Abbott hold from the east inbound to London Luton Airport descends through 8,000 feet as depicted here, and then in the altitude band, the green area is where we expect aeroplanes to be descending from 8,000 to 7,000 feet, the yellow area from 7,000 to 6,000 feet, etc. And they descend down underneath the Laurel hold, if this is active, to make its approach towards London Luton Airport. So easterly operations is landing towards the east and aircraft departing towards the east, but we're only proposing changes to arrival flight paths, not departures. So they route underneath the Laurel hold, and then they follow in a southwesterly direction, descending from 6,000 feet down to 5,000 feet north of London Luton Airport, paralleling the runway, and towards the vicinity of Leighton Buzzard. Wherever we can, we avoid overflight of Leighton Buzzard, and then turning towards the south to intercept the final approach track to line up with the runway and land. In this area here, in fact, over this area to the west of Letchworth Garden City, we don't expect significant change, but this is what we are experiencing today, or what people in this area will experience today. Now, 70% of the aeroplanes, roughly 70% of the aeroplanes, will appear between these black solid lines, and this is a format that we'll be using in the rest of the slides. So 70% of the aircraft will be concentrated between these black lines. And that's because controllers are vectoring, they're giving headings, they're giving guidance, direction to the pilots to take them from the hold, position them in the appropriate position to join this final approach track. And the positioning of these airplanes can be dependent upon other aircraft in the vicinity, the weather, the need for a very precise gap between one arrival and another in order to allow a departure to depart. So there's lots of considerations that the controller takes into account when positioning these aircraft, but 70% of them would be within the black line. The other 30% would be roughly where the greatest concentration, I should say, is within the black lines. The 70% is in the coloured area. The blue lines, which are coming up now, the dashed blue lines, are where we're giving alternative routings or shortcuts to aeroplanes. so that we can expedite their arrival. We can ensure that they've got the most efficient flight paths into the airport, and therefore avoid having to hold or have extended paths. But that doesn't happen all the time because of the situation. It only happens about 30% of the time, but that can be expected to continue in the future. So that's what happens today. The change, this is option 1, which is vectoring and shortcuts. This is where the controllers are giving headings, directions to the aircraft to fly from the direction of the new hold towards just to the west of Huntingdon into London Luton Airport. So this is option 1, again, easterly operations. So as I explained earlier on, aircraft would route towards the new hold, but wherever possible, not hold, and then start to be vectored or positioned to come from this region in the St Neots area and head south towards the airport. Now, this is an area which will experience a change over the patterns that are flown today, and as you can see, they would leave this area at about 8,000 feet and descend to 7,000 feet in the green, 8 to 7,000 feet in the green area, 7 to 6,000 feet in the yellow area, and descending just to the south of Biggleswade, and then joining pretty much the tracks that are flown today and the headings and the positioning of the aircraft that are given today inbound to London Luton Airport. Now, as in the previous slide, about 70% of the aircraft would be positioned within these coloured areas, with the highest concentration of tracks within the black areas as defined there. However, 30% of the aeroplanes would continue to be given more direct routings to make it as efficient and as environmentally expeditious as possible. And again, we expect that to continue under this option. So hopefully that's giving you indication when aeroplanes route from the new hold location down towards London Luton Airport's runway 07, easterly runway. Now, option 2, you will see, is a similar sort of path, but here we're introducing performance-based navigation routes. These are closely defined, and accurately flown routes. And here you can see that the route is far more defined, more concentrated routes. And you will see they, again, hopefully we will not require airplanes to hold. We'll do our best not to hold aircraft, but then route them to the south and to the southwest. Now, we expect about 50% of aircraft to follow these defined routes. And this enables the aeroplanes to fly and navigate these routes without controller intervention, and they will do that accurately, and therefore the number of interventions between the controller and the pilot will reduce. However, we still expect about 20% of flights to be vectored because, again, a key role of the air traffic controller is to ensure that aeroplanes join the final approach track with a defined and accurate spacing between them. And that's not always possible if flying a performance-based navigation route if it's very busy. And that's because the tools to support the spacing of the aircraft between these routes aren't currently in place. So therefore we need the flexibility, the controllers need the flexibility to move the aeroplanes around and vector them to create that very precise gap between each arriving aircraft. So here, about 20% of the airplanes would be within the coloured blocks, but the greatest concentration now, if vectoring, would be in the dashed black line. With the other remaining 30% being given the shortcuts, the alternative routings to make the overall operation as efficient as possible, as previously explained. That is route 1, and as you can see here, we have been able to design a route which just to the west of Luton at Leighton Buzzard, has been able to avoid overflying Leighton Buzzard. But obviously this route has to go somewhere. There are design considerations and design criteria which dictates the turns of these routes, and we have to abide by certain design constraints. But ultimately, it gives us the flexibility to avoid the more significant or more populous areas in order to try and reduce the number of households that are affected. The great or the opportunity that performance-based navigation provides is that we can define more than one route to enable alternation between those routes, and that's a key consideration in this consultation. So this next option is a different route which takes traffic and primarily to the north of Leighton Buzzard before turning in onto final approach track. Again, because of aeroplanes will be routing towards the new hold before turning in towards Luton Airport, there will be a funneling effect to the north unless we can provide other more expeditious routings. But this is where we believe 50% of aircraft following a performance-based navigation route, this second route, would follow. And as you can see there, moving towards the south-east or routing towards the southwest under their own navigation north of Leighton Buzzard before turning in. Now, both of these routes are part of this option 2. Likewise, we do expect 20% of traffic to be given vectors, which could place aeroplanes in this wider area, more dispersed area. And we expect 30% of flights to be given the alternative routings or shortcuts to make it as expeditious as possible. But now, hopefully, you will see that with these two routes, we can provide different options for how aircraft will fly from the holding area to the north towards the airport. Bearing in mind that vectoring will still be required for 20% of the time, with the concentration in the dashed lines as indicated, the other 30% given the shortcuts. But it gives that opportunity to distribute the aircraft and alternate. And that frequency of alternation, again, is a key part of this consultation. Now I'm going to move on to westerly operations. This means aeroplanes, as I said earlier on, land and depart towards the west. Hopefully, again, you can orientate yourself with westerly operations by looking at that slide. Now, what happens today? Very similar arrangements for traffic from the east and also into the Laurel hold. And as they exit the area of the Laurel hold in the Royston area, instead of heading further west, they turn quite quickly to the south to position for a westerly arrival, landing on runway 25, the westerly runway. Now, as you can see, it's tight. It's tighter in terms of airspace in order to lose the height. But this is where the controllers again vector and descend aircraft. And you can see there the tracks and the areas in which aircraft are operating today. 70% again operating in the regions denoted by the colour blocks, with a concentration of those 70% within the solid black lines, with the other 30% given shortcuts and alternative routes to make the operation as efficient and expeditious as possible. So hopefully that explains what happens today on westerly operations. With option 1 in the consultation, which is vectoring and shortcuts, this is aircraft being guided by controllers from the holding arrangements to the airport. Because we have moved or proposed to move the hold to the north, that means that the flight paths will change. And as before, even on westerly operations, we expect aeroplanes to be routed towards the hold and then diverted away from it, if not required to hold, and follow the directions of the controller to join the final approach track as seen here. Now again, quite a wide area where we can expect aeroplanes to be at various altitude bands based upon the position of the aircraft at the time and the availability to route more directly to the airport. But 70% of the aircraft would be vectored in this way, with the highest concentration within the black lines as depicted, with 30% again given an alternative routing and more direct routing towards the airport. So that's the option one for vectoring. The other option again is utilizing performance-based navigation routes. Accurately defined, accurately flown routes, and therefore the concentration of traffic will be higher than in vectoring. But with this proposal, because it still includes vectoring, we can still expect aircraft to be vectored in this wider area with the greatest concentration within the black dashed line as indicated, with the other 30% given the direct routings. So there you can see hopefully the route 3 for westerly operations, and the other route which would accompany this westerly operation is depicted as shown here. Route further to the east before turning in. So very similar routing over the north of Vieira St Neots down towards Biggleswade, but then moving further east before joining the final approach track. Same principle. Vectoring is going to be also utilized in order to maximize the efficiency of the overall operation and the spacing between aircraft. Concentration of vectored aircraft within the dashed black lines, and 30% of traffic routed more directly to the airport to reduce the flight time, burn less fuel, and therefore emit less emissions. So hopefully that gives you an indication, and as before here, it gives us the opportunity to alternate the flight paths, a key part of the consultation between each route. Sorry, I went back one further than I intended to. So that hopefully explains how the airspace would operate. Option 2 is our preferred option. It is more compliant with the airspace modernisation strategy for the UK, which is the rollout of performance-based navigation routes. If the view is that option 2 is not favoured, it's likely that in time performance-based navigation routes will be required to be introduced at some point in the future. So in our view, option 2 is moving us towards being more compliant with the airspace modernisation strategy. It certainly reduces the amount of complexity and the interventions that air traffic controllers have to make to ensure that aircraft are guided safely to the airport, because the aircraft will be flying the routes very accurately themselves. However, we still need the opportunity to vector aircraft and position them to maximise the efficiency of the runway and reduce the distance where necessary between aircraft. As I've said, we're proposing 2 routes for both easterly and westerly arrivals, which can be alternated and therefore offer some respite. And the routes have been designed to minimise overflight of population centres. And obviously that means that some areas would be affected and other areas would not see the same level of overflight. But that is a consequence of utilising performance-based navigation, but it does offer that more predictable and more scheduled alternation of flights. It utilises performance-based navigation, as we've stated, and therefore removes the reliance on ground-based radio aids and navigation aids that are in place today. And the very fact that we can alternate gives some predictability and more equitable distribution, as I've already said, and that would apply to about half of the arrivals, with the other half being vectored or given alternative routings. So whilst this introduces predictability. There will still be the requirement to vector and position aircraft alongside the use of performance-based navigation routes. So I'll hand now back to Jane, and she can run through with you what the next steps are before we come back to a question and answer session.
Thanks, Lee, for that presentation. I hope you found that helpful. I know it's an exceptionally complex thing to try and get your head around, but we hope that that has been a useful explanation for you. The feedback that we received from this consultation is really important. We want to know that the views of people who are likely to be impacted have been taken into account, and they will help to shape our final proposal. The consultation is actually on the Civil Aviation Authority's website. You can get to it through our virtual exhibition, and I think most of you will have found our virtual exhibition in order to register for today's webinar. And we do hope that you will put your feedback through that portal. Once the consultation closes in February next year, we will go through all of the responses. They'll be categorised, analysed, and we will publish the conclusions that are drawn from them. They may well result in changes to the design if they flag things that we have not taken into consideration. We expect to submit a formal airspace change proposal to the CAA in June of next year. And if the Civil Aviation Authority approves it, it would be implemented no earlier than February 2022. And we will keep the CAA change portal updated with all information as the ACP progresses. So that's the next steps in the whole process. Let's move on now to some questions and answers, and they have been coming thick and fast, so thanks very much. I do hope that some of the questions you've been posing have been answered by Lee anyway in the course of the presentation. I know the first question is around how frequently the aircraft will be using the new stack, the new hold, and I hope that Lee's explanation of that has answered that. I mean, certainly we have no wish to hold aircraft with all the attendant fuel burn if we don't absolutely have to. It's probably also important to say that the base of the hold is 8,000 feet or thereabouts, which is about 1,000 feet higher than most of the holds in London. So this is at a height where we are required under the Civil Aviation Authority's guidance to prioritise efficiency over noise. So noise is prioritised below 7,000 feet. And I'm sure we'll come on to that, and I think Nicole will talk about that a little bit more in due course. So if we could pass on to the next question, which is around will planes overfly the northern end? Will planes overfly the northern end of St Neots and Little Paxton End, regardless of whether they are using the holding stack? So, Lee, I'm going to pass that one to you, if I may, please.
Sorry, Jane, could you just repeat that, because I can't see what the questions are.
Sorry, it's will all planes overfly the northern end of St Neots and Little Paxton End, regardless of whether they use the holding stack?
As I said hopefully you can hear me, as I said during the presentation, if aircraft are required to hold, then they will leave the hold in quite a routine way and route, yes, over that area. However, as I've stated throughout the presentation, we do our very utmost not to hold aeroplanes, and because that is a tactical decision, that is a decision that's made upon the situation at the time by the controller. It's difficult to say exactly when that decision will be made and which, and therefore where the aircraft will be positioned. But all I can say is the general direction of flight for the majority of the flights, 70% of the time, will be towards the hold, and therefore it is highly likely that the area to the north in the St Neots area would experience the aeroplanes that are inbound to London Luton, because the other 30% of the time aircraft will be given more direct routings, taking them away from that. So we believe about 70% in the region in the area of St Neots, but exactly where those aeroplanes will fly it is difficult to say, because we don't know how the controller at the time would vector, which has a significant impact on where the aeroplanes overfly. But as a general rule, 70% of the airplanes would be routed towards that region identified by the green or yellow areas on the maps.
Okay, thanks for that, Lee. And I think we have one for Nicole here as well. How many flights an hour will be using the new flight paths and the hold? Will it be 24/7?
Thanks, Jane. So at Luton Airport, we have lots of different noise restrictions for all different times of the day. We do have lots of restrictions during the nighttime period, but we do also operate for 24 hours. We have a lot of cargo movements during the nighttime period. The nighttime period is 2300 to 0700, and that is protected. So we have a limit on the number of movements, so that's arrivals or departures during that period, and also the aircraft types that can operate during that period. As well as that, we monitor that on a quarterly and annual basis, and that gets also published on our website. So you can find those reports and see how many movements we have and the time periods that we have them. So hopefully that will be of some use. Certainly at the moment, the reports look a little bit different because of COVID. So you might want to go back to 2019 reports to look at the pre-pandemic situation for our flight numbers.
Thanks, Nicole. The next question that has come through is what's in the consultation document, saying that an aircraft at 8,000 feet is equivalent to a busy office, which will be unpleasant in a quiet residential area. If I start off on this one, Nicole, and then pass over to you, I think our answer to this is that noise impacts are very subjective, and what one person finds disruptive, the next person might not. So we can't say if the new level would be better, worse, or a nuisance or not. The website compares different noise levels to everyday noises, such as a busy office environment. And there are several videos which illustrate the noise experienced from an overflight, which depends on a range of factors, including how directly overhead the flight is, the weather, what background noise there might be, and the local environment as well. But they're only intended to be illustrative. They're not scientifically based. They're intended to give you an idea of the noise which could be in your area. So when you're viewing these, you should also consider the background noise you would normally experience. So for instance, would you be inside with the TV or in a large open area? Would you be out in the garden? Where would you be? Because the amount of background noise may alter your perception of the aircraft noise. Nicole, do you want to add anything to that?
Yep, I can add something. So I was just going to say, obviously above 8,000 feet, our priority is not on noise, and it's about efficiency of the airspace. So we just have to keep that in mind when we are looking at the airspace design.
Okay. I've frozen, guys. Sorry, everybody, my screen froze for a second there. Bear with me just a second. I'm trying to bring the questions back up again. Okay, so there's a question here about what consideration has been given to overflying quiet green spaces and conservation areas. Lee, is that a question you could take?
Sure, yes. Can you hear me? It says bad network quality. There must be some gremlins in the system this evening. But ultimately, the government guidance on alleviating noise, etc. The cutoff is 7,000 feet, and wherever possible, the guidance is that we should concentrate flows in order to minimise the number of households affected, number of people affected. This ultimately means that aircraft, if we're avoiding the population areas as best we can, means that aircraft are going to be placed where there are fewer populations. That is the government guidance, that is the CAA's guidance, and that is what we try to achieve. And we recognise that, therefore, there is a consequence. Areas of outstanding natural beauty, again, wherever possible, should be avoided. However, it is difficult to do that where airports are actually located quite geographically close to areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks, etc. But we do take these issues into account, and we try and formulate the best overall proposal, but recognising it is always a balance. But in terms of below 7,000 feet, we do try, as a consequence of performance-based navigation capability, to avoid overflight of more populous areas.
I'm sorry, did you hear that? My microphone seems to have muted. We had a question which was about why all four options converge on the same point of the country, which would suggest that we haven't proposed more than one route, despite the environmental assessment saying that we should. Is that something that you can answer, Lee?
Yes, sure. I hope you can understand that because of where the position of the hold is, and hopefully you can understand why the hold is positioned there, it naturally means that aeroplanes would be routed to the north of Potton, Biggleswade, St Neots area. And whilst this is a consultation, there may be opportunities to introduce slightly alternative routes, recognising that if that is possible, then it does start affecting other people areas. So the routes will have to be positioned in a safe and as efficient way as possible. But that is the very purpose of this consultation. So please do understand the impacts using the postcode tool in the exhibition hall to understand what the impact is, utilising the charts that we've provided so that you can provide that feedback. And we will take that feedback into consideration and see if it is possible to take into account the views that people have provided within the constraints of the route design and the very rigorous design procedures that we have to go through. But we do recognise that area in the St Neots area is going to be an area whereby aeroplanes are routing from the holding area down towards London Luton Airport.
Thank you, Lee. We've had a very similar question, which is around whether the flight paths have been selected purely based on cost, meaning that the most efficient route is to place the stack exit and PBN routes over towns that could otherwise easily be avoided. I hope that Lee's answer just now has addressed that. In terms of the hold itself, in the design principles, which are available through the consultation document, if you have a look at the stage 2 documentation, you will see all of the considerations that went into whether we needed a new hold at all, and if so, where it could be positioned. It became clear very early that we did need a hold to deal with periods of heavy traffic and for contingency reasons. And that there was no safe alternative to the position in the proposal. Let me move on to another one. Stansted has 2 stars and hold patterns proposed. Why are you not proposing 2 holds for Luton to offer respite? Lee, can you take that one?
Absolutely. So I think most people would prefer not to have more and more holds. We do need one, but we believe that we can manage the aircraft arrival flight path safely with one hold. As I've explained, we do our very utmost to avoid holding, and we believe that one hold, because it extends from the 8,000 feet to 14,000 feet, that's the maximum capacity of the hold. We would be able to maintain a safe situation with just the one hold, and hopefully you will also appreciate that actually fitting in another hold in that area is really quite problematic. It would then become very inefficient because the hold would be much further away from London Luton Airport that we would want, because the Laurel hold and the Abbott hold, which will be retained for Stansted, are are already in situ, and many other flight paths are operating in that area. So we are very confined.
Okay, thanks, Lee. I'm going to move on to another one for Nicole, if I may. What population data set is being used for the communities under the 4 flight path proposals?
Yep, so this is about the population data that we've provided in our full options appraisal document. So it's not in the main consultation document, but it's in our full options appraisal. So this work was conducted at the end of 2019. So it uses a 2018 population data. We will be looking at this again before submission with the final options appraisal, which we do as part of stage 4. And that will hopefully include more up-to-date population data and also the local plans, which the local councils will provide us with.
Okay, thank you. We've had some questions, very specific questions about specific localities, particularly around Potton, and whether a continuous descent approach will be in operation over Potton. I do have a quick answer to that, which is that our modelling shows that aircraft would conduct a CDA starting higher and further away from London Luton than they do at the moment, which can improve the noise at areas further away. So Luton, Nicole, you might want to talk about your CDA targets here.
Yeah. So we have a continuous descent approach target for all of our arrivals. So previously that was set at 90%, and actually this year we've increased that to 92% of all arrivals conducting a continuous descent approach. So that does keep the aircraft higher for longer and helps to reduce the aircraft noise on the ground. That's helpful.
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry, I'm having real problems with my mute button here. It just won't unmute. There were also some questions about the size of aircraft and whether you have any analysis of the noise relating to aircraft types, Nicole?
Yeah, as part of the consultation document, we have provided some noise from aircraft types, but generally at Luton we have the single aisle kind of aircraft, so they're the Airbus A320s, Airbus A321s, which are smaller and they're passenger operations. We also have some business jet operations, so they're the even smaller aircraft, typically 5-6 passengers. And also we have a few cargo aircraft, but cargo typically makes about 10% of our traffic, so it is very few, and they are the larger ones.
Okay, thanks, Nicole. I'm going to draw it to a close here because I'm mindful that we've gone past the 8 o'clock mark. I know we started a little late, and my sincere apologies again for that. I've had a question, which is whether the questions being asked in this forum will be used as feedback as part of the consultation. The answer is that responses will still need to be submitted via the online form on the Civil Aviation Authority website. We will be posting all of the questions that have been asked tonight and the answers on the frequently asked questions part of the virtual exhibition. So you will be able to find all of the answers. If you are concerned that we've not answered your specific question, we will have answered that and put it on the website for you to see. And you can, of course, contact the AD6 consultation email address if you would like to ask a further question, and we will get back to you on that. So I would like to thank you very much indeed for your patience tonight while we got to grips with the technology on this, the very first of our webinars, to thank you for joining us, to thank you for great questions. I hope you found it informative and helpful. There are a number of more webinars that are planned throughout the consultation period, so do please sign up for another one if you would like to. And I hope this has been helpful. Thank you very much and good night.